the acrid smell of disinfectant wrapped tightly around my limbs. The attending physician held the CT report, his face pale as he delivered a verdict like an ice-cold blade stabbing into my eardrums. Advanced malignant tumor, multiple metastases throughout the body. At most 48 hours. I collapsed limp on the hospital bed, my fingertips cold. I reached out to grasp the hand of my newlywed wife, Chloe, who sat beside me, seeking some comfort, but she pulled her hand back first. There was no pity in her eyes. Instead, an undisguised ecstasy rippled beneath the surface. She leaned close to my ear, her red lips brushing my earlobe, her voice as light as a viper's hiss, each word piercing clearly into my ear. Perfect, darling. Once you're gone, your 3 Riverview penthouses, 2 storefronts, and that limited edition $1 million supercar will all be mine. My mind went blank. Before I could digest this, her stepson Harry, standing behind her, stepped forward immediately, his eyes full of greed, utterly indifferent to the fact that I was lying on the hospital bed at death's door. Mom, the houses and stores are yours, but that black Lamborghini has to be mine. And that collection of luxury watches in your safe. I've had my eye on them for a long time. Chloe casually patted her son Harry's shoulder, her tone airy, completely ignoring my dazed gaze. What's the rush? He'll be gone soon, and everything will be ours to decide. Oh, and the 90% equity in his company. I've already asked a lawyer. We don't have to share it with any collateral relatives. Harry chuckled mockingly, his eyes sweeping over my foredrip hand, his sarcasm undisguised. Dad, you've lived a full life. You spent half your life building all this fortune, and in the end, it's just a dowry for us mother and son. If we'd known your health was this bad, my mom wouldn't have bothered to sweet-talk you for so long. My chest tightened, and even the fluid in the foreline trembled slightly. I am 52 years old, a self-made man who built a chain restaurant group. My ex-wife Martha died unexpectedly 5 years ago. Unable to bear the loneliness, I was moved by Chloe's gentle tenderness and remarried just a year ago. It turns out it was all a carefully orchestrated scam. The doctor, sensing the awkward atmosphere, muttered, "Get some rest," and quickly walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Chloe pulled Harry into the hallway, thinking I was too drugged to hear, and began scheming without restraint. We don't need a big funeral, just go through the motions. Save the gift money for a vacation in Scotland. I've already contacted a collector for that antique jade Buddha in his study. We can cash it out next week. And his daughter Lily from his first marriage. Once he's gone, block her number. Don't let that girl come around and cause trouble over the inheritance. I've already swapped the will. All the inheritance goes to me and Harry. Lily gets nothing. Their laughter seeped through the door crack, sharp and piercing, throbbing against my temples. I lay rigid on the bed, staring at the stark white ceiling, my blood seemingly frozen solid. Just minutes ago, my wife had gently stroked my forehead and vowed to take good care of me. But now she had revealed the bone-chilling greed beneath her tender skin. With all my strength, I turned my head and looked at the wedding photo of Chloe and me on the nightstand. She smiled warmly and charmingly in the picture, but now I realized every trace of that smile was a disguise. Everything I had built with half a lifetime of toil, all the sincerity I had given with my whole heart. In the eyes of this mother and son, they were nothing more than 2 slabs of fat waiting to be carved. With only 2 days to live, I had to endure not only the excruciating pain of illness, but also witness the ugly, cold-hearted true faces of the woman beside me and my stepson. The sunlight outside was harsh, but in this hospital room, there was no warmth, only an icy chill that completely engulfed me. The silence of the room was shattered by the fading footsteps in the corridor. Chloe and Harry's laughter scraped like fingernails across glass, its echo swirling stubbornly in the air. I stared at a spider slowly crawling in the corner of the ceiling. Its slender legs cast a blurred shadow under the harsh white light. Every step was laborious, yet it persisted in burrowing toward a crack in the wall. It was looking for an escape, and I had none left. The fore fluid dripped one drop at a time, beating a monotonous rhythm. I slowly raised my right hand. My knuckles were white with tension, my nails digging into my palm. The pain dulled. Cancer cells had eroded the nerve endings. Even pain was discounted. The black phone on the nightstand lay silent, its screen dark like a closed eye. Chloe had moved it farther from me before leaving, claiming radiation was bad for my health. Now, I understood. She was afraid I might make one last call before I died. Lily. The name flashed like a beam of light into my chaotic mind. After Martha died, Lily and I had drifted apart. She blamed me for remarrying too quickly, for holding another woman's hand before the white flowers on her mother's grave had even dried. I remembered that argument vividly. She stood in the foyer of our old house, backpack slung over her shoulder, eyes red, shouting, "Dad, you have no idea how bitterly Mom left." Then she slammed the door and left. After that, she only returned briefly to grab a few changes of clothes, never making eye contact with Chloe, and barely with me either. Later, she went to Northern Europe to study design. Every Christmas, she sent me a postcard, never with a fixed return address. She drifted without a permanent home. I called her. 8 out of 10 times it went to voicemail, and on the rare 2 times she answered, it was just a curt, "I'm fine," or "don't worry," before hanging up. I thought time would heal everything. I thought once she'd had her fill of wandering and come to terms, she would come home. But time didn't wait for me. It ran ahead and doused me with the cold water of advanced malignant tumors. 48 hours. Not enough for reconciliation, not enough for apologies, not enough to make up for all the conversations we'd missed over the years. I forced myself upright, a dull pain searing beneath my ribs like a rusty hook twisting through my organs. A thin layer of sweat soaked through the back of my hospital gown, clammy and cold against my skin. As my fingers reached for the phone, my nail scraped against the metal edge with a faint screech. I pulled back, first pressing the call bell, but not all the way. I let go. Even if a nurse came, it would be useless. Chloe had already thoughtfully informed the hospital that I needed peace in my final hours, and the fewer visitors the better. I unlocked the screen. The notification bar was empty except for a few weather alerts and food delivery coupons. I opened my contacts, my finger hovering over Lily's name. The screen's glow made my fingertip translucent, revealing the bluish veins beneath. I pressed the call button. A long, drawn-out beep. Beep! Echoed from the earpiece, each tone stretching like someone slicing time with a blunt knife. "Hello. The number you have dialed is currently unavailable." The robotic female voice repeated coldly twice, then switched to English and played again. I hung up and stared at that familiar number for a long while. I had Lily's Nordic number saved, but she hadn't updated her social media in 3 months. Her last Instagram post was a sunset over Copenhagen's harbor, captioned with only a sun emoji. Where was she now? At her studio, finishing a design? Walking down some cold street? Or, like me, trapped in some white room waiting for something? I closed the contacts and opened the voice recorder app. The red dot blinked quietly. Every word Chloe and her son had said by the bedside was stuck in my throat. I couldn't swallow them, nor spit them out. They were like shards of glass. I pressed save, and the file was automatically named recording_20260-416_1432. Was this evidence? I didn't know much about law, but I knew Chloe wouldn't have said those things in front of me unless she was certain I could do nothing. What could a dying man with 2 days left do with a recording? Send it to whom? Who would believe it? My phone vibrated. Low battery warning. The red battery icon nearly drained. I quickly switched to messages and sent Lily a text. "Dad is sick. Very serious. Call me when you see this." The words were dry, like an official letter without a salutation. I wanted to add something softer, but my fingers froze over the screen and wouldn't type more. I had failed her too much over the years. So much that a simple, "I'm sorry," no longer sufficed. So much that I felt ashamed to use my illness to guilt her at the last moment. From down the corridor came the sound of wheels rolling over tiles, approaching, the cleaning lady pushing her cart. She stopped at the door, poked half her body in, saw I was awake, and grinned warmly. Sir, want some water? Your lips are cracking. Her name badge was pinned to her left chest pocket. The top part was smudged by her sleeve. Only the bottom half of the character Chun was legible. I shook my head. My throat was parched like sandpaper, unable to form a full syllable. The auntie didn't linger. She dipped her mop in water and swept a curved arc across the floor, darkening a patch of the gray tile. She hummed a tuneless folk song, off-key and meandering, yet it sounded far sweeter to me than any of Chloe's saccharine darlings. The water stain dried quickly. In less than half a minute, only a faint outline remained. My life was drying up just as fast. The doctor's 48 hours, converted to seconds, that was 172,800. It sounded like a lot, but every second was slipping away faster than I could grasp. As the cleaning lady was about to leave, I managed to rasp. Do you have a pen? She paused, then fished a blue ballpoint pen from her apron pocket. The cap still had a convenience store price tag on it. 3 yuan 50. I took the pen and pointed to the blank medical record book on the nightstand. She brought it over, flipped to the last blank page, and spread it before me. I bent down, pen tip against the paper, my hand trembling so badly the first stroke went crooked. Chloe. I wrote her name first, then Harry beneath it, and below that, with every ounce of my strength, I traced out Lily. 3 names, like 3 nails, hammered into this page of my medical record, hammered into the final stretch of my journey. Keep this for me. I gasped, my chest heaving like a bellows, and don't let anyone see it. Auntie Chung glanced at the paper, her expression unchanged. She nodded solemnly, carefully tore the page off, folded it twice, and slipped it into the hidden pocket of her apron. She patted the pocket. Don't worry, I didn't see anything. Then she pushed her cart away. The wheels made a short clunk as they passed over the tile seam. The room fell quiet again, quiet enough to hear my own shallow breathing. I turned off the phone screen and clutched it in my palm, its metal casing gradually warming to my body heat. All I could do now was wait. Wait for Lily to call back, or wait until I had enough strength to contact old Joe, the legal counsel of my group, who had been with me for 15 years and was 10,000 times more trustworthy than Chloe. But I hadn't even memorized his private number. It was saved in my contacts, and I wasn't even sure I could scroll to his name before my phone died. While I was weighing my options, the door was pushed open from outside. Chloe came back with a cup of warm water, her face once again adorned with a tender smile, every curve of her brows and eyes perfectly angled, like a stage expression rehearsed 1,000 times. Her steps were light, her soles barely making a sound on the rubber floor. Why are you sitting up? Lie down. She set the cup down with one hand and reached the other toward my shoulder. I twisted away from her touch. The sudden motion pulled at the lesion in my abdomen, and cold sweat instantly beaded on my forehead. Chloe's hand froze midair. Her expression stiffened for a split second, then quickly returned to normal, though beneath the smile, a thin impatience surfaced. Darling, what's wrong? You were fine just now. She brought the cup to my lips. The rim was the perfect temperature. Not too hot, not too cold, seemingly thoughtful. Have some water to soothe your throat. The doctor said you need more fluids in your final stage. I stared at the clear water rippling gently in the cup, its surface reflecting my sallow face and sunken eye sockets. I barely recognized myself. My cheeks hollow, my cheekbones jutting high, my lips pale and cracked with dried blood. Every day, she fed me water, wiped my body, changed my dressings, wearing just the right amount of worry on her face, while behind my back she had already planned how the funeral would be run. Chloe, I rasped, each word squeezing out of a gravel pit. Do you still remember? The combination to my safe? Her eyes lit up. The spark was brief. In the past, I would never have noticed. But now I saw it clearly, like a match struck in a darkroom. For an instant, all her disguises were illuminated. Of course I do, you told me. Your birthday reversed plus 2 zeros. She smiled eagerly, settling onto the edge of the bed, her knee brushing against my calf, a warm sensation through the thin sheet. Why do you ask? Thinking of making arrangements? Don't worry about all that. Leave it to me. I'll make sure you go in peace. Go in peace. The irony of those words from her mouth was unbearable. My will had already been swapped. The treasures in my safe had long been earmarked. Even my own daughter's contact was to be blocked. I tightened my grip on the phone, my thumbs stealthily feeling the side power button to ensure it hadn't been accidentally shut off. "Where's Harry?" I asked. "Oh, he went down to the convenience store, wanted a soda." Chloe bent over to tuck my blanket in, her movements as tender as if she were caring for a sleeping infant. "He's just a kid. Don't take him seriously. The things he said about sports cars and watches, they were just jokes. You're his father. You wouldn't really hold it against him, would you?" I closed my eyes, unwilling to look at her face. Harry was 21, 6'1", with a stubble of youth on his chin, reeking of cigarette smoke when he called me dad. What kind of child was he? They had ganged up on me for a whole year, from the wine on our first blind date, to her cooing in my arms on our honeymoon, saying she wanted a home, to the cup of calming milk she made me every night before bed. I had no proof of what was in it, but ever since I started drinking it, I'd felt groggy at night and often drowsy during the day. The company had gradually been handed over to professional managers she recommended. Now, I realized she had infiltrated every corner of my life. "I want to see old Joe," I said, opening my eyes. Chloe's fingers paused on the blanket corner for 2 seconds before continuing to smooth out the wrinkles. Her tone didn't change. "Old Joe? He told me last week he was going on a business trip abroad for half a month. He should be in Paris right now. Why do you need him? I've got the company matters covered. Just rest easy." She was lying. Old Joe had reported to me last month that all international business was suspended for the year because several overseas stores were renegotiating contracts. He himself wouldn't leave the country for 6 months. Chloe didn't know that even bedridden with illness, the business instinct in my mind still held taut. Years in the restaurant industry had made me keenly sensitive to information. "Then dial his number for me," I said, staring into her eyes. "I need to verify something about my will with him." Chloe's smile finally cracked. The corner of her mouth twitched, but she quickly covered it by bending down to blow on the water cup. "The will's already been taken care of. It's filed with the lawyer. There's no need for you to go through all that trouble now. It'll just wear you out." She looked up at me, her eyes reddening on cue, her voice softening. "Darling, you have so little time left. Can't you just stay with me?" She reached to take my hand. I jerked back, my arm banging against the bed rail with a loud clang. Startled by my sudden reaction, the redness in her eyes vanished instantly, replaced by barely suppressed annoyance. "What is wrong with you?" Her voice rose a notch. "You've been acting strange since earlier. If I've done something wrong, just say it." I didn't answer. Instead, I turned my phone over and lit up the screen. The recording app was still open on that audio file. Below the file name was the duration, 6 minutes and 38 seconds. The moment Chloe's eyes fell on it, all the color drained from her face like blood cut off at the source. Her lips parted twice, but even her habitual darling didn't come out. You recorded it?" Her voice wavered, her eyes glued to that red progress bar. "The words in the hallway," I said, word by word. "Every single one is recorded." The air in the room froze solid. Chloe stood frozen, bent over with her hand extended, like a clay statue struck by a pressure point. A few seconds later, she snapped out of it and lunged at me to snatch the phone, her nails nearly scratching my hand. I shoved the phone under my pillow with all my might and pressed the lock button. "Give it to me," she hissed in a low, raspy voice, her face twisting into a hideous mask, the fine lines around her eyes cracking with strain. "Are you insane? You think this can threaten me? You're about to die. Who's going to fight for you?" My chest heaved, the oxygen mask fogged up with rapid breaths. She clamped down on my wrist and twisted, her strength startling. The usual feigned frailty was gone. I heard my bones creak faintly, and a bolt of pain shot up my entire arm. "Let go," I squeezed out through clenched teeth. Footsteps sounded outside, followed by the nurse's knock. "Mrs. Chloe? The patient needs rest." "You should." Chloe let go as if burned, stepped back, and within 2 seconds retracted her twisted expression into a tearful, pitiable one. She turned to open the door, her voice trembling just right. "It's nothing, nothing. He just mentioned he missed someone, and I got a little emotional." She stepped aside to let the nurse in, dabbing the corner of her eye with her sleeve. The nurse came in with a tray, carrying a new painkiller injection. She glanced at my reddened wrist, then at Chloe's reddened eyes, but said nothing, just skillfully disinfected, injected, and pushed the plunger. The cool liquid entered my vein and spread, gradually dulling the pain but clouding my consciousness. Just before I sank into complete haze, I saw Chloe standing behind the nurse, furiously typing on her phone, the blue glow illuminating a face I had never seen, thin-lipped and grim. The injection hit hard. My eyelids felt like lead, darkness swallowing the edges of my vision. The last image I caught was Chloe smiling gratefully at the nurse, saying, "Thank you, he can finally get some rest," in a soft, sweet voice, a world apart from the woman who had just clawed at my wrist. In the last second before I lost consciousness, I thought of the phone under my pillow. She would surely find a chance to take it, delete the recording, wipe all call logs, erasing my last resistance on this journey. But I still had that paper. The medical record sheet with the 3 names, stuffed into the hidden pocket of the cleaning lady Chun Xiaolan's apron. Outside, dusk was falling, painting the room a murky orange. I sank into the dimming light, like a kite cut from its string, falling into an endless void. In my dream, I saw Martha standing in a white mist, smiling at me. She looked as she had 5 years ago, hair shoulder length, fine laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, wearing the dark green sweater I'd given her. She reached out to me, her lips moving in words I couldn't hear. I ran desperately toward her, but the ground beneath turned soft as cotton candy, sucking me in deeper and deeper, until even her silhouette melted away. When I opened my eyes again, the room was pitch black. A thin line of light from the corridor night lamp crept under the door, like a sharp blade slicing through the darkness on the floor. I turned my head to feel under the pillow. My fingers met only the rough texture of cotton. The phone was gone. She'd taken it as expected. I gritted my teeth, tasting rust in my mouth. The painkiller's effect hadn't fully worn off. My limbs were heavy as concrete, but I forced myself to roll sideways and stretch my entire arm down along the edge of the mattress. Earlier, when she wasn't looking, I'd used the tiny spring from the pen cap and a staple from the medical record to make a simple clip, wedging a folded note into the gap of the bed frame crossbeam. On that note was old Joe's phone number, which I'd scrawled from memory after the cleaning lady left. I wasn't sure if it was correct, but it was my last chip. My fingertips touched the edge of the note. I used my nails to pull it out bit by bit like fishing a fish from deep water. When I finally got it, my palm's sweat had already dampened the paper. I clenched it in my fist, then slowly raised my arm and pressed the call bell. The night nurse arrived quickly, a young woman, her name tag reading Zhao Lin. She pushed the door open, glanced both ways down the corridor to make sure no one was following, then quietly stepped in and leaned over. "Sir, what's wrong?" I pressed the note into her palm, my voice barely a whisper. "Call this number and say, 'Old Joe Martha Hill, understand.'" Zhao Lin looked down at the digits, then at me, hesitating for a moment, as if to ask why I couldn't call myself. But in the end, she said nothing, just nodded and tucked the note into her nurse's uniform pocket. "I'm on duty until 6 tomorrow morning. I'll call before shift change," she murmured, tucked the blanket around me, and left, closing the door behind her. As the door closed, the elevator at the end of the corridor dinged. I recognized the familiar footsteps, the unhurried click of high-heeled shoes on tile. Chloe was back, and with a purpose. The night was still long, and my time was racing away at the speed of cancer cell division. The elevator door opened and closed with a soft sigh, then the rhythm of those high heels shifted from leisurely to hurried. She was heading toward the nurse's station. I held my breath, straining to catch fragments from the hallway. The wall wasn't well soundproofed. Chloe's voice, coming from a distance, was already muffled, but I recognized the urgency in her tone. She was speaking with the night nurse. Occasionally, Zhao Lin's voice interjected, calm and professional, indistinct in content, but sounding like she was parrying. After a few minutes, the high heels returned, approaching the door. The door cracked open. Chloe's face peered in, the corridor light silhouetting her from behind. Her gaze swept over my bedside call panel, the flat fold of my pillow, and finally settled on my half-closed eyes. I deliberately kept my breathing long and steady, feigning deep sleep, my eyeballs still beneath my lids. She stood there for a moment, probably checking whether I was truly awake, then quietly pulled the door closed. But she didn't go far. I heard her footsteps stop just outside, followed by a low, muffled phone call. Yes, the night nurse, young, long hair. Find out when she was hired. Any background? Yes, I'm worried he might have left some backup. She was checking on Zhao Lin. This line was cut off. I clenched my fist under the sheet, my nails digging into the old wound in my palm. When I'd written that note earlier, the pen spring had cut a shallow gash on the inside of my index finger, which was now aching dully. Zhao Lin had taken old Joe's number and promised to call before 6 in the morning, but Chloe had already targeted her. If Zhao Lin was reassigned, switched shifts, or held up by some emergency, that call might never go out. I needed another way. My gaze fell on the drawer pull of the nightstand. Inside were my ID card, medical insurance card, and a life insurance policy that Chloe didn't know about, taken out by Martha for me years ago, with Lily named as the beneficiary. Martha had dragged me to sign it 8 years earlier, saying, just in case something happens to you, Lily will have something to fall back on. I called her a jinx, but signed anyway. After Martha died, I renewed the policy, but never mentioned it to Chloe because in my heart that money had always been meant for Lily. The drawer wasn't locked, but Chloe had sat by the bed for so long. Who knew if she'd already rummaged through it? I propped myself up slowly, moving as carefully as if defusing a bomb. Every muscle pull sent a dull ache through me. My fingers reached the handle just as the door burst open. "Oh, you're up again." Chloe stood in the doorway, holding an enamel mug, steam rising from the rim. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides, set the mug on the table, and hooked her arms under my armpits to push me back down, her movements hurried and heavy, a far cry from the tender care of earlier. As I was shoved back onto the pillow, my head knocked against the headboard, and I saw stars. "You keep this up, and you'll wear yourself out." The doctor said to rest. She chattered as she reached for the nightstand drawer, seemingly to get a tissue to dab my sweaty forehead. When the drawer slid open a crack, my heart nearly stopped. Inside, my ID, insurance card, and that policy were all neatly stacked in the same order. She probably hadn't opened them. Otherwise, with her nature, seeing Lily's name as the beneficiary would have set her off long ago. She pulled out a tissue and pressed it perfunctorily against my forehead, soaking up the sweat with a rough friction. "I'll have the doctor change your meds tomorrow morning. That painkiller this afternoon was too strong. You were out for hours, wouldn't wake up." As she spoke, her eyes reddened again, the performance flowing like a faucet turned on and off at will. "Darling, you don't know how worried I've been." I averted my gaze to the window. The night was utterly dark. The city's light pollution blurred into a vague, orange halo in the distance, like the earth had a fever. Lights twinkled in scattered windows across the opposite hospital building. I wondered what the people behind those windows were going through. Were they betrayed by loved ones like me, swallowed by relentless pain, or just an insomniac relative staring at a snoring patient? Across those dozens of meters, all windows were silent, none prying into another's sorrows. Chloe remained seated by the bed, pulling out her phone to scroll through videos, the volume so low it was barely an indistinct laugh track for some variety show. She flicked through that background noise for over 10 minutes, then abruptly stood up, said, "I'm going to the bathroom," and walked out, phone in hand. The hot water in the enamel mug sat untouched, now steaming its last wisp of vapor. The moment she closed the door, I threw off the covers. This time I moved faster. My toes found the edge of my slippers, and with one push and step I was on the floor. The thin soles made almost no noise on the tiles. One hand steadying myself on the four-pole, I pulled open the nightstand drawer with the other, scooped out the stack of documents and policy, and flipped through them twice. ID there, insurance card there, policy there, but beneath that thin life insurance certificate was something else. A folded A4 size document. The paper stiffer than standard print, the creases already whitened from repeated handling. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. A bold black headline in the center pierced my eyes. Supplementary Declaration of Inheritance Will. Below, a law firm's embossed seal, dated 1 month ago. The testator's name was mine, but the handwriting wasn't. I knew my own signature. Every stroke ended with a habitual upward flick, a muscle memory forged from signing thousands of contracts over a lifetime of self-made business. But this signature was straight, precise, overly cautious, as if someone had traced and imitated my old signatures. The beneficiary column listed 2 names, Chloe Whitmore and Harry Whitmore. Lily's name was nowhere to be found. This was what she'd been hiding all along. She didn't know I'd already rummaged through that drawer while I was still conscious. She thought the dark folder beneath the policy was sufficiently concealed. She had no idea that I was now standing barefoot on cold tiles, having read every word of this forged document. My hand shook so much I could barely hold the paper. I quickly refolded it, slipped it back to the bottom of the drawer, put the policy on top, replaced the ID and insurance card in their original spots, and then, steadying myself on the 4-pole, shuffled back to bed. Barely 5 seconds after I lay flat, the doorknob turned. Chloe came back in, her face showing nothing unusual. She just glanced at me to confirm I was still in place, then returned to her chair and continued scrolling videos. My heart pounded like a drum, but I kept my composure. She was here. My phone was with her. Old Joe's number was with Zhao Lin, and Zhao Lin was under her watch. Almost all external avenues were blocked, but she still didn't know I'd discovered the forged will. What would happen after dawn? My gaze passed over Chloe's bowed head to the thin strip of light under the door. The light wouldn't go out, and I still had about 30 hours left. At 6:15 a.m., the sound of shift change came from the corridor, footsteps and metal carts mixing as day shift nurses arrived. Zhao Lin should have already clocked out, but she'd said she'd call before shift change. That meant before 6. Had old Joe received the call? Had he gotten a message? Chloe had curled up in the companion chair all night, now rubbing her eyes groggily. Her hair was mussed, her makeup faded, her bare face looking wan and tired. In the past, I'd have felt sorry for her staying up. Now I only found it absurd. She was here not to see me through my final journey, but to ensure I had no chance to contact the outside world before I died. A knock at the door, a day shift nurse pushing a cart. She smiled politely at Chloe, then turned to me. Mr. Zhang, the attending physician wants you to go to the CT room for a rescan. A rescan? Yesterday's CT had just come back with a death sentence. Why another scan today? I glanced at Chloe. Her expression flickered with surprise as well, quickly masked. She stood up and interjected. Rescan? But we just had one yesterday. What did the doctor say? The nurse shook her head. I'm not sure. Dr. Zhang ordered it, said to come before 9. Chloe fell silent, her fingers twisting unconsciously in her hem. She was probably worried that the doctor had revised his diagnosis or discovered something new. If my at most 48 hours window suddenly stretched out, her plans would have to be recalculated. I watched her forced composure and felt a twinge of cold satisfaction. At 8:50, I was helped into a wheelchair and wheeled to the CT room. Chloe followed behind, her steps hurried, her high heels clicking jarringly loud, oblivious to the disapproving looks from other families in the corridor. A few people were queued outside the CT room. We waited about 10 minutes before being called in. Lying on the scanning table, I looked up at the circular ring of equipment overhead, its metal surface reflecting cold white light, like a giant, silent eye. The scan was brief, a few minutes, and it was over. As I was wheeled back past the nurse's station, Zhao Lin was no longer there. A short-haired nurse was bent over the schedule. Chloe walked beside me, then suddenly quickened her pace to the station and leaned in to ask something in a low voice. The short-haired nurse looked up, shook her head, and said something I just barely caught. Resigned, turned it in this morning. Zhao Lin had resigned. Not reassigned, resigned. On her own, but why? Had Chloe pressured her? Or had she simply decided to avoid trouble? Had she made that call or not? A barely concealed relief crossed Chloe's face as she turned and pushed me onward. She bent down and whispered in my ear, "It's nothing. That nurse quit. Nothing to do with you." Her tone was as light as if commenting on the weather. She thought I didn't know who Zhao Lin was, thought I had been too groggy last night to remember anything. Back in the room, I was settled onto the bed. Chloe went to get hot water, leaving the door ajar. Immediately, I reached for the newspaper on the nightstand. The cleaning lady always dropped off that morning's paper. Though Chin Shilon wasn't here today, the paper was still there. I flipped through the folded sections, my index finger probing between the pages, and touched something small and stiff, a note folded twice. I unfolded it. A single line in ballpoint pen, called. Old Joe said he'll be here before dark. Zhao. Warmth surged from my heart through my limbs. Zhao Lin had made the call. Old Joe would come before nightfall. I clutched that note, my knuckles white, my eyes suddenly hot. The door opened. Chloe came back with hot water. I quickly crumpled the note into my palm and, with my other hand, turned the newspaper over to cover the blank section. She set the cup down by the bed, her eyes landing on the paper in my hand. "Oh, you're reading the paper today?" I didn't answer, just folded the paper and placed it back on the nightstand, slipping the crumpled note into the pocket of my hospital pants. She bent down, reached out, and pressed her dry, warm palm to my forehead. "You look a little better than yesterday, darling." Her voice was as syrupy as ever, a world away from the cold calculations beneath the door crack last night. I closed my eyes and let her hand rest there, but in my mind I was counting down to nightfall. Before darkness fell, Old Joe would arrive. Someone knocked softly at the door. Chloe straightened to open it. Outside stood a middle-aged man in a dark gray jacket, short, round-faced, gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He carried a brown paper file bag, a corner of blue and white documents peeking from the top. Chloe's smile froze. Old Joe looked at her, adjusted his glasses, his tone as steady as if reading a financial statement. "Sister-in-law, I came to see old John. There are some company matters I need to confirm with him in person." He said sister-in-law with a slight upward inflection, polite, but with a distant finality that brooked no refusal. Chloe stood in the doorway, her hand on the frame, her nails digging into the wood. She turned to look at me. Her gaze was complex, surprise, anger, and a desperately concealed guilt. I leaned back against the pillow and gave her a faint smile. "Let Old Joe in. Company matters need to be settled." She stepped aside. Old Joe walked in and quietly closed the door. The lock clicked shut with a short snap, like the first piece placed on a chessboard. Chloe retreated to the window, arms crossed, her eyes darting between the file bag and Old Joe's hand and me. Old Joe pulled up a chair beside the bed, placed the file bag on his lap, and didn't rush to open it. Instead, he looked me over carefully. We had worked together for 15 years, from that first street corner shop to a chain spanning 7 cities. In his eyes, there was a mix of professional formality and something deeper, old friendship. "Old Jong," he began, his voice just loud enough for Chloe to hear. "Someone called me last night and said you were in the hospital, in bad shape." I caught a red-eye flight back. Chloe interjected from behind. "Lawyer Joe, you didn't have to rush." Old Joe didn't turn around, didn't respond. He just pulled a document from the bag, flipped 2 pages, and handed it to me. "Take a look at this." Printed on the page were clauses about a supplementary agreement for temporary transfer of equity in the group, dated last week, with Chloe's name in the authorized agent column. The signature wasn't mine. The surrogate signatory line was blank. Chloe's face visibly whitened. This document appeared in the company's legal department approval process last week, Old Joe said, taking off his glasses to wipe them with his sleeve, his tone flat. "The clerk said it was submitted under your authorization, but I checked the OA system. Your personal approval account was last logged in 2 months ago." "Old Jong, did you know about this supplementary agreement?" I shook my head. Chloe suddenly stepped forward, her lips parting as if to explain, but Old Joe raised a hand to stop her. "Don't rush, sister-in-law. I'm not done. Besides this equity transfer supplement, There's another thing I intercepted. He pulled out a thicker stack of papers from the file bag. A forged will change application. The law firm's seal has issues. I've already had colleagues verify it. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out halfway. Chloe stood there, lips pressed into a thin line, hands twisted in front of her, nails nearly cutting into the back of her other hand. She hadn't expected old Joe to return so soon, much less with such substantial ammunition. I lay on the bed, watching all this, my cancer-ravaged heart beating steadily and strongly. Before dark, old Joe had come. Zhao Lin's note was still folded in my pants pocket, its corner pressing against my thigh like a small badge of honor. Old Joe turned to me and placed the forged will change application on the nightstand, pushing it within my reach. Old John, how do you want to handle this? If you want to press charges, I can contact the Economic Investigation Unit now. If you prefer civil litigation, I'm ready on that front too. I was silent for a few seconds, then slowly turned my head toward Chloe. She met my gaze. Her eyes were finally red. This time it didn't seem fake. The tears were real, the panic real, though only she knew how much was genuine remorse and how much was fear of being exposed with nothing left. Old Joe, I said, my voice hoarse, but each word clear. Let's not call the police yet. First, help me find Lily's contact. I need to call her. Chloe's shoulder trembled faintly. Old Joe pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, swiping a couple of times, then turned the screen toward me. It showed an international number with the Danish prefix, +45. He said quietly, Lily's Christmas postcard last year was sent to the company front desk. I had someone save the address and number. This is her studio number in Copenhagen. I don't have her personal mobile, but this number should reach her during work hours. I stared at that string of digits, my throat clogged with cotton. Over the past year, I called her no fewer than dozens of times. 8 out of 10 went to voicemail, and the 2 times she answered, she gave perfunctory replies and hung up. I didn't know if she was deliberately avoiding me or truly busy. After Martha died, she changed completely. From that girl who used to sprawl on my study carpet reading comics, to an adult with a remote, cold aloofness in her brows. Every time she came back to the country, she chose days I wasn't home, took a few books from my study, picked a few small keepsakes from her mother's belongings, and left silently. Not even a goodbye text. I opened my mouth, but only half a breath came out. Old Joe understood. He placed the phone beside my pillow, stood up, and walked to the window with his back to me to dial. Chloe still hadn't moved, her hands twisted, knuckles white, her gaze fixed on old Joe's back without relaxing. She was probably calculating her next move, whether to beg for mercy, resist, or look for another escape route. The call connected. Old Joe said briefly in English, "May I speak to Ms. Lily Zhang?" The other side replied, and after a pause, he turned to look at me and handed over the phone. I raised my right hand and took it. The cool metal seeped through my fingers into my palm. A hesitant, clear female voice came from the earpiece. "Who's this?" It was her. Her voice was a little lower than I remembered, with a slight glottal lilt from the Nordic language, as if polished by long winters. "Lily," I said, my voice scratching like a rusty hinge. 3 seconds of silence, then a barely audible sharp intake of breath. "Dad." I pressed the phone to my ear, my elbow propped on the pillow, my shoulders trembling slightly. So many words were stuck in my throat. I couldn't pull any of them out. I wanted to say Dad is sick, Dad might be leaving, Dad has been sorry all these years. But everything turned into blankness, leaving only the sound of breathing oscillating through the receiver. "Your voice sounds awful," Lily said, paper rustling in the background as if she'd set down her tools. "Are you sick?" "Last night, I got a text from an unknown number telling me to contact you right away. I thought it was a scam. It was old Joe who'd sent it. He'd obviously been busy after Zhao Lin's call last night." "Lily," I took a deep breath, the heaviness in my chest easing slightly. "Dad is really sick. I'm in the hospital. Can you come back?" Another few seconds of silence on the line, then someone calling her in Danish. She responded, "Jeg, kommer om lit," and then, covering the mouthpiece, said, "Dad, what exactly is going on? Which hospital?" "I have a project due tomorrow. The earliest I can make it is the day after. There's no time. I cut her off, a note of pleading I hadn't intended creeping into my voice. The doctor said, at most another 30 hours. The line went completely quiet. I couldn't even hear her breathing. I thought the signal had dropped, but before I could speak, she suddenly burst out, her voice twice as fast. Which hospital? Which room? Send me the address. I'm going to the airport now. I'll have someone send it. I turned to old Joe and gestured for him to send the address. He nodded and pulled out another phone to operate. On Lily's end came the screech of a chair leg across the floor, then the sounds of rummaging through a bag for documents. Dad, hold on. I'll book the earliest flight. Don't fall asleep too deeply. Wait for me. The end of her last sentence softened, like a corner of ice melting in a warm palm. I have so many things to tell you. I'll wait. I hung up and let the phone drop to the bedsheet, my fingertips still holding the warmth of the earpiece. Outside, the morning light was bright. Sunlight slanted into the room, casting a bright trapezoid on the white wall. Chloe still stood there, hunched like a bug crawled out from an upturned jar, exposed and at a loss. Old Joe put his phone away after sending the message, sat back down in the chair, and placed the file bag on his knee, speaking unhurriedly. Sister-in-law. Well, Miss Chloe, let's sort this out. The forge will change application and the equity supplement agreement. You handled both. Do you admit that? Chloe's lips parted several times, her lashes fluttering rapidly. Then she suddenly collapsed onto the foot of the bed, as if her knees could no longer bear her weight. She looked up at me, tears brimming, welling up fast and urgent, her nose reddening. Darling, I was foolish. I was so afraid. Afraid that after you're gone, I'd be alone with Harry. How could we survive? I was desperate. Shut up. My voice was hoarse, but the two words hit like nails, nailing the rest of her sentence to the air. What were you afraid of? 3 Riverview penthouses, 2 storefronts, a limited edition supercar, a collection of luxury watches, 90% of the company's equity. You had already planned where everything would go. You even planned to block my own daughter. That's a moment of foolishness. Her lips trembled. Tears dripped onto the sheet, darkening a small patch. A month ago, seeing her cry would have melted me. But now, her pitiful face overlapped perfectly with the one that had laughed and divided my spoils by my bedside yesterday. Her tears were a prop that flowed as easily as a switched faucet. Cheap as paper funeral flowers compared to the courage of Zhao Lin, who risked her job to make that call for me. Old Joe cleared his throat and pulled out another document, sliding it to me. This time it was a printed transfer record, listing over the past 10 months the amounts moved from my personal accounts to several different bank accounts in Chloe's name, totaling more than 7 figures. Each entry had handwritten notes: household expenses, renovations, investments, Harry's study fund. But old Joe had circled 3 of them in red. The receiving accounts were under an offshore company, whose legal representative was a foreign name I didn't recognize. The destination of these 3 sums I've had checked, old Joe said, adjusting his glasses. After going into the offshore account, they were split and moved out again. Part went into a fund under Harry's name, and the rest, he glanced at Chloe, was cashed out at a jewelry store and a luxury car dealership. That black Lamborghini's down payment last year came from this money. Chloe's face was drained completely, her lipstick smeared from biting her lips. Her fingers twisted the bedsheet until her knuckles cracked. She stood frozen like a point, tears not even flowing anymore. I was with you for a year, I said, staring at her, my voice so low it was nearly drowned by the air conditioner's hum. You made me warm milk at night, put a coat on me in the cold, stayed up whole nights when I coughed. I treasured all that. I thought I had someone warm and caring for the rest of my life. The money you moved, I could have dismissed as you securing a safety net for yourself. But touching Lily's share, that's not allowed. She's my daughter with Martha. With Martha gone, I'm the last shelter she has in this world. Chloe suddenly lifted her head, a layer of defiance surfacing beneath the tears. Lily? Has Lily even bothered with you these years? She doesn't even come home for New Year. Did she even know you're hospitalized? I've been by your side for over 300 days, wiping your shit and your piss, bringing tea and water. What has she ever done? Why should she get all the benefits? Her voice rose to almost a shriek. Someone in the hallway paused and then walked away. Old Joe frowned, got up, and closed the door securely before sitting back down. Chloe's emotions burst like a broken dam. Tears and words flooded out together. Be honest with yourself. Was I not good to you? I got up to pat your back for an hour when you coughed at night. I cooked all kinds of porridge and soup when you had no appetite. I entertained all your old colleagues when they visited. What did I do that wasn't attentive? So I moved some money. So what? You're going to die anyway. Who's the money for? For that biological daughter who won't even show her face. As the last word left her mouth, its pitch abruptly twisted, as if she'd realized how cruel it was and forcibly stopped. But what had spilled couldn't be taken back. It splattered into the small space between us, wet and sticky, dripping down. The room fell silent save for the hum of the air conditioner vent. I looked at this woman, and a complex mixture churned inside me. Anger, disappointment, absurdity, all stirred into a burnt porridge. She was right that she had served me for over 300 days, down to the smallest detail. I even once believed she'd be sad after I was gone. But was she sad about sharing the property, or about serving for a year and not getting to keep it all? You can go, I said, closing my eyes, my temples throbbing. Take Harry and go. From now on, we're done. Chloe shot up, scraping her chair leg loudly against the tile. What do you mean? Exactly what it sounds like. Old Joe took over, his voice steady as if reading a legal document. First, forging a will change application. That's a criminal offense, but old John doesn't want to pursue it now, so we can hold off on reporting it. Second, the equity supplement agreement is revoked. The legal department will handle it, and your authority as agent ends here. Third, the funds transferred from old Zhang's accounts to your name, minus legitimate joint household expenses, must be returned within a set period. I'll have accounting prepare the exact figures. Chloe stood there, chest heaving, her gaze darting between us twice, then suddenly let out a cold laugh, the tears still wet on her cheeks, that laugh sharp as a blade. You're asking a dying man to negotiate repayment? Who's going to enforce it after he's gone? You? Lawyer Joe, you'll sue for him, and after he dies, you'll still collect his debts? What standing do you have? Old Joe didn't get angry, just looked at her evenly through his glasses. I'm the lawful executor of his will. That was notarized 5 years ago, with Lily Zhang and the Zhang Family Foundation as beneficiaries. The replacement you have is forged, and I emphasize this is already a criminal matter. The only reason old Zhang isn't pursuing it now is that he doesn't want to waste his last hours in court with you. Chloe's cold laugh froze, like wax melted by fire, the edges beginning to warp. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whipped around to grab her bag from the nightstand, zipper snarling. She stuffed her phone inside, headed for the door without looking back, her heels fast and frantic. At the door, she paused for a second, her back slightly hunched as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she said nothing, pulled the door open, and left. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, first hurried, then slowing as she reached the elevator. A final pause, the elevator doors opening and closing, and then total silence. Only old Joe and I remained in the room. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, letting out a long breath. Old Zhang, you're too soft. In my hands, I'd have called the police long ago. And then what? I leaned back against the pillow, all my strength drained. We get some money back. She does a few years inside. And then what? I'd spend my last hours making police statements, going to court, watching her cry for leniency. I don't want to carry that with me. Old Joe was silent for a moment, then resealed the file bag, set it on the nightstand, and patted my hand gently. Fine, your call. Let's talk about something else. In that call to Lily, she said she'd booked the earliest flight. From Copenhagen to here, at least 12 hours, plus connections, maybe tomorrow afternoon. He paused, weighing his words. Can you hold on? I stared up at the ceiling and gave a faint smile. I don't know. The doctor said 48 hours at most, starting from yesterday afternoon. Now there's less than a day and a half left. If she gets here tomorrow afternoon, just about right. Then don't worry about anything else. Just rest. Old Joe pulled his chair closer and lowered his voice. I'll stay here and guard the door. Anything happens, I'll handle it. Chloe, I've got people watching her. She can't pull anything. And that Harry. This morning, I saw him at the hospital entrance with a convenience store bag. When he saw me, he turned and walked away. His mother must have called him. Those two won't dare come near you for a while. I nodded. My eyelids were growing heavy. The painkiller's effect was wearing off, and a dull soreness was creeping back from the lesion. Old Joe noticed and got up to ring the call bell for a nurse to change the drip. When the nurse came in, I was half squinting. Through blurred vision, I saw a figure in pink scrubs approach, skillfully hang a new bag, and reinsert the needle into my hands for port. A slight sting, then a cool spread through my veins. Mr. Zhang, rest now. Call if you need anything, the nurse said softly, like coaxing a fussy child. I murmured and let my eyelids close completely. This time I didn't dream of Martha. I sank into a deep, black stillness, floating on warm water, directionless and free. After an indeterminate time, distant sounds reached my muffled awareness. Old Joe on a low call, the cart wheels passing the door, an occasional car horn from outside. All of it filtered through thick cotton, indistinct and unheeded. When I opened my eyes again, the room's light had turned to that warm white of afternoon. Old Joe wasn't in his chair, but the file bag was still on the nightstand. Beside my pillow sat a bottle of water with the cap unscrewed, a sticky note on it with scrawled handwriting. Went downstairs to buy lunch, back in 5. Joe. I turned my head to the window. Sunlight filtered through, illuminating a pot of potholes on the sill, every leaf vein distinct. Across the way, in a window of the opposite building, a figure in blue and white stripes was leaning out, an old woman with a plush cat-shaped cushion under her arm. My gaze passed over her, over the buildings, over the gray-blue skyline, looking further north. Lily was on a plane. 10,000 meters up, she might be dozing against the window, sketching in a notebook, or simply staring at the clouds. She'd promised to come back, to come before I closed my eyes. I repeated that to myself over and over, each time loosening that swollen knot in my chest just a little. The door swung open. Old Joe came in carrying 2 plastic bags, steam curling from the top. Seeing me awake, he grinned. Just in time, pork rib congee still hot. The auntie at the porridge shop downstairs knows you. Insisted on adding a side of pickled radish. She said she used to work as a kitchen helper at your first store. I propped myself up on the pillows. Old Joe set the bowl on a nightstand and carefully lifted the lid. The aroma of ribs and rice spread out, light but stirring a long-forgotten appetite. I took a spoonful into my mouth. Warm grains slid down my throat, warming my stomach. Old Joe, I said after swallowing a mouthful, suddenly remembering something. When Lily arrives, don't bring her straight to the room. Old Joe looked puzzled. Why? I looked terrifying like this. I glanced down at my withered wrist, veins bulging beneath the skin like winding tributaries on a dry riverbed. Lost nearly 30 pounds. My face is sunken. She'll be upset. Have her go to the house first, or visit the old place to look at her mother's photos. Let me catch my breath, see if I can look a little better before she comes in. Old Joe didn't answer, just silently took a sip of his own congee, and after a long moment said, "Okay, I'll arrange it." Outside, the afternoon light was shifting westward. The pothos's shadow lengthened across the windowsill, its leaves swaying gently. From the next room, a radio crackled on. A hoarse male voice singing an old Cantonese ballad, the tune slow and lingering, seeping through the thin wall into my ears. The lyrics were blurred, only the melody undulating in the air. I leaned back against the pillow and listened, a faint smile tugging at my lips. Old Joe finished his congee on the opposite chair and was flipping through a newspaper, the rustle of pages blending with the radio melody into a warm, cozy net. I suddenly wasn't so afraid of that countdown anymore. Time was moving forward, but the light in the room remained. The congee was still warm. Old Joe was still here. Down the corridor, a new patient had arrived and family members were speaking softly at the door as if afraid to disturb anything. And Lily was drawing closer in the sky above, at some latitude I couldn't see, moving toward this light, this kanji, this afternoon, inch by inch. My phone never rang again. Chloe didn't call. Harry didn't either. They'd probably heard the real weight in old Joe's final words, or figuring out how to cut their losses. I didn't care. The pothoe's vine trailed a small tendril over the sill, swaying in the breeze, its tender green tip curling upward, lively in the afternoon glow. The radio switched to another song, a woman's voice, gentle and melodious, singing, "In days to come, though 1,000 songs may pass upon my distant road." I couldn't catch the rest, but the tune touched something deep within me. There was still half a bowl of kanji left. I picked it up and took another sip. A little cooler now, but the rib fragrance lingered. Before dark, there was still a long stretch of afternoon light waiting for me. The afternoon passed more slowly than I'd expected. So slowly that I could almost see the seconds slipping in the movement of that beam of light across the wall, inch by inch from the windowsill to the floor, then climbing up the opposite baseboard. Old Joe sat at the foot of the bed, handling messages on his phone, occasionally glancing up to confirm I was still breathing, then going back to typing. I asked him to keep the door half open so that the sounds drifting in from the corridor could fill the space with a little life. The radio next door stopped singing and switched to an afternoon radio drama, the dialogue rising and falling dramatically, some Republican-era story, the male lead shouting a woman's name with his voice cracking. I couldn't follow much, just caught a few scattered syllables, but the sheer intensity made me imagine the studio scene. Actors with headphones pouring their hearts out into microphones, voices almost hoarse. Every day, living people were raising their voices, and I, at this moment, had to be careful even with each breath, afraid that a single deep inhalation might clip another chunk off the time I had left. Around 4, old Joe took a phone call and stepped into the hallway for a few minutes. When he came back, he put the phone in his pocket. His face was expressionless, but he took off his glasses and wiped the lenses twice, a small habit when something was on his mind. "What is it?" I asked. He pulled the chair closer and chose his words. "Someone from Chloe's side just contacted me. She wants to talk, says the terms can be negotiated." I didn't agree outright. "I wanted to ask you first." "Talk about what?" I stretched my hand out from under the covers. The 4 ports scraped against the sheet, a faint sting. "Terms? What terms does she have to offer?" Old Joe leaned back, lowering his voice. "She said the money can be adjusted. She won't fight for the equity, but she wants to keep the redemption rights for the fund under Harry's name and that Lamborghini. She says it was Harry's birthday gift. If he has to give it all back, the kid can't take it." Her tone on the phone was much softer than this morning. I stared at the ceiling lamp, a fly circling the bulb, round and round, stubbornly. "The down payment for that car came from my account." "What about the balance?" "She paid the balance from her own account, so she insists Harry bought it with his own savings, nothing to do with you." Old Joe's mouth twisted slightly. "A 21-year-old kid with no steady income all last year. What savings?" "Check his statements and you'll see." "Let her keep the car," I said. Old Joe raised an eyebrow. "Let her keep the car," I repeated. "The money comes back. The equity she never actually got her hands on anyway. No need to argue over that. As for the fund, the principal came from my transfers. That comes back. I don't want the interest. Consider it her wages for taking care of me this past year." Old Joe opened his mouth as if to argue, but finally just sighed. "Old Jean, that's too generous. That car is worth 7 figures. Is 1 year of her service really worth that much? Only I know if it's worth it." I turned my head to the window. The afternoon sunlight was turning golden, lengthening the shadow of the pothoes. Whether she cried or laughed, she did stay by my side. When I coughed in the night, she was the one who handed me water. When I had no appetite, she cooked all kinds of food for me. You can't measure that purely in money. If she returns the money and stays out of Lily's way after I'm gone, that's fine. Let my daughter have a clear accounting, no messy disputes. Old Joe was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "All right, I'll get back to her. She can keep the car. The fund gets redeemed. The rest of the money is to be settled within a set time." and she'll sign a declaration waiving any inheritance rights in black and white, so she can't come back later. He stood and stepped into the hallway again to make the call. I heard him speaking in a low, measured voice for about 5 or 6 minutes, occasionally tossing out legal jargon. The other side didn't seem to put up much resistance. Things went more smoothly than I'd expected. Old Joe came back, gave me an all-set gesture, and resumed flipping through the newspaper he'd been reading. Around 6 in the evening, the nurse brought dinner, plain congee with steamed broccoli and a small piece of steamed fish. Old Joe raised the head of the bed a little, and I ate slowly, each swallow warming my stomach a little more. Outside, the sky began to redden. The sunset looked like someone had spilled a whole jar of marmalade across the horizon, thick orange from the ground up, fading to light pink, then soft purple-gray. Lights were switching on in the windows of the opposite building, one by one, like stones placed on a vast board. The radio in the next room came back on, now the evening news, the announcer's standard Mandarin reading international headlines, flat but clear. Listening to news that had nothing to do with me brought an odd peace. The world was still turning. Elsewhere, people were living, arguing, negotiating, loving. And I was in this little white room, slowly eating congee, listening to old Joe chat about his son applying to universities. That kid insists on studying archaeology. Old Joe shook his head, laughing. I told him to pick something useful. Where do you work after archaeology? He says a museum. I said, how much does a museum pay you? Enough to buy books? He says, Dad, you don't understand. It's his dream. I smiled, my abdominal muscles pulling slightly with a dull ache, but my heart was light. Let him go for it. Young people with dreams are a good thing. I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't had that drive back then. True enough. Old Joe folded the newspaper on his lap and leaned back. Oh, and I checked Lily's flight. Direct from Copenhagen. One connection in Helsinki. Landing tomorrow at 3:40 p.m. if no delays. 3:40. I did the math. From yesterday afternoon's diagnosis until now, about 26 hours had passed. Tomorrow at 3:40 p.m., that left roughly 21 hours. If her flight was on time, if I could hold on, we were separated by just one night and one morning. After 8 in the evening, the corridor lights dimmed. Only the small night light by my bed cast a warm glow. Old Joe set up a camp cot in the companion chair, a thin blanket to his chest, his glasses on the side table. He lay with eyes closed, breathing evenly. I didn't know if he was asleep or just resting. I lay on my back in the dark, eyes open, replaying everything from yesterday to today in my mind again and again. The phone wasn't with me anymore, but I didn't need it. The calls that needed to be made had been made. The people who needed to come were on their way. The people who needed to leave had left. What I had to do now was simple: breathe, wait, and at 3:40 tomorrow afternoon, in a room with light, see my daughter one more time. Outside, the night was dense as ink. In the distance, an ambulance siren approached, then faded, breaking the silence for a moment before returning to stillness. The moon wasn't out tonight, but deep in the sky, a few bright stars shone. Through the upper left corner of the window, I could see one of them twinkling quietly, like a distant dot. I closed my eyes and in the darkness moved my lips slightly, saying something silently to that star and to the person on that plane thousands of kilometers away, leaning against the window. I said, Lily, Dad is waiting for you.